So today, I have another special guest here. It's Cimo with not 6, not 7, but 8 O's.
And don't you forget it.
Yeah. How are you doing with the quarantine? I know you've got the Crush Card Cup going on, and how's that been going? I feel like it must be busy, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty chaotic, but that's my own doing, so it's mainly my fault. But I figured that, you know, given my status within the community, it's the very least that I can do to not only provide people the ability to keep playing Yu-Gi-Oh, but also another conduit to keep pumping out content simultaneously.
Yeah, and speaking of that, actually, what do you think of the sort of idea of an online metagame? I know that's been a term I've sort of been hearing thrown around. Like, there are people who sort of feel like, well, Adamantimators wouldn't be this good in real life, or like Eldritch wouldn't have been this good, because, you know, those decks are doing really well. Do you feel like the online metagame is indicative of what, you know, tournament Yu-Gi-Oh would look like if we were playing in real life right now? Like, how do you feel about it?
Right, exactly. There's a level playing field, and so people, you have to think, someone could be really skilled at the game, but not be able to be in a position to afford buying real cards, might not be able to travel to a YCS, whatever, so they might not be able to compete in that tournament and actually show how good they are at the game. But now that we are in this online meta of sorts, people aren't necessarily restricted in that way, and so you could see all these other players, these online warriors, so to speak, be able to come out and just show how good they are, because now it's like, okay, we get to play in events that are online, and yeah, it's a very interesting ecosystem for sure.
When we get back to Yu-Gi-Oh in, let's say, like August or September, right? When like maybe a YCS or regionals sort of begin to come back, we're gonna have like so many new sets. Like, we're gonna have Eternity Code out, and then we'll probably have Rise of the Duelist out, like, as well. And it's just gonna be like, do you feel like that will effectively kind of just take a big dump on like what's happening now, like Eldritch and, you know, and Adamantimators, and just we won't have even gotten the time to see what they can do? Or do you still feel like that's going to persist?
It's interesting because we have this adaptive, I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh always has an adaptive metagame, right? As soon as a new set gets dropped, we start to see those changes take place, and as time progresses, you know, Eternity Code is interesting because it's like, it's released in Europe like next week at the time of recording this video, but it's like delayed in the US, so that's a bit odd. And then Rise of the Duelist, like, hopefully will like line things back up at some point, but we could see those sets have an impact just depending on how they perform. I mean, I know that Rise of the Duelist specifically has like the Dragma archetype, which is looking to have a lot of promise in tandem with like Invoked and potentially Necroz. I mean, it's very early because Rise of the Duelist just came out in Japan only a few weeks ago, but there is some potential that we could just see like another overhaul of the format, just like we saw with Eldritch and Adamantimator. Then all of a sudden, like, Dragma just comes and takes over everything. It's very possible.
I want to talk about your audience, because I feel like you in particular, of like every YouTuber, at least in my opinion, are the best channel for people who kind of just want to get into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh, get started, but like they don't know what their resources are, like kind of how to keep up with the game. And I feel like your segments do the best job of sort of covering each of those bases. You know, you've got the meta analysis, you've got set analysis, you know, we talk about new cards when they leak and stuff.
Right.
Is that, like, could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what is your goal as a creator in terms of like the content you make? Do you see it as like, that's your target audience, you want to get the sort of somewhere between casual and competitive players, or is it a little bit different?
Yeah, so I like to make the analogy a lot of the time that I see my channel as the ESPN of Yu-Gi-Oh! So I'm not necessarily going to be like the Tom Brady or the insert X best player of a sport in, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh! Equivalent, but I'm very good at, and where I see my niche is taking large amounts of information and synthesizing it and producing it and bundling it in content in such a way that players of all skill levels, whether they're, you know, novices or intermediate or expert, can take that information and up their game to either, you know, introduce themselves into competitive or keep up with the competitive metagame, whether it's the evolving metagame in terms of the meta analysis, new strategies that come out as they get released, or just keeping people up to date with like, oh, what side deck cards are people playing now? What's this new deck that just topped this event that might have potential? Being able to just provide that information to people is really a lot of the ways that people are good at just keeping up with all the different information that's available, because it's really difficult to kind of just go out and look at this yourself, and people don't have that kind of time, especially if you work 40 hours a week or if you're a student or whatever the circumstances may be. And so that's where I see my niche in the community specifically.
What do you feel like Konami could be doing better to help players like get that info?
We really only get it in written context, and I think that's kind of what diminishes the value there, because it's not like people aren't going to go read it, but it's like, it's not exciting, right? It's like, okay, here are the top decks, like, and that's it. Like, there's like nothing else really to it. There's not really like a discussion. There's no talk about like why these decks are doing well, and that's where we come in to be able to give our own opinions, or, you know, provide whatever information we have. Maybe we were at the event, so we were able to talk with the players specifically, get the deck profiles and so forth. Then we're able to kind of put the pieces together and create that narrative for the players of, here's what went down at this event, here's why this deck did well, you know, here were the matchups, you know, so on, so on, so on. So I think Konami could improve it in a way where I think this kind of just goes back to the live stream coverage in general. And this is, again, something they have improved on as well. They've started just recently, I think it was when they started kicking back up in like October of last year, when they started revitalizing their live streams, at least for US specifically. Europe's always had the live streams. But just being able to...
I'm always so jealous about that.
I know, right? I know. It's not... we're not going to get into that. But, you know, it's something that other games do very well, is just providing so much coverage, because the people who love this game just want to be bombarded with coverage. They want to know the story and the narrative of how that event went down. And because we aren't able to provide that story to players, because, you know, we're not allowed to film and stuff, it's kind of up to Konami to deliver that information to the players. But when they aren't forthcoming with that information either, it's tough.
There's a big gap, right?
Right, absolutely. There's this massive chasm of, you know, just a void of, you know, lost information that people don't know, and people want to feel like they're part of that experience. And so we're fortunate that, you know, people like you, myself, you know, Sam, and people who go to events, we're able to kind of fill that gap and build that bridge to cross that chasm. But I still think that there's ways that they can improve the coverage, or even working with other content creators, which they have been reaching out and doing. So maybe just in the future we'll get to that point where the relationship is a lot more synonymous than fractured like it is currently. Right.
But I think that as like YouTubers, it's so much more personable and like organic and just authentic. Like, it's like real. So something I've always wanted is like at YCS events to show people around. Like, you know, there's lots of people who can't like go to these events, and they would like to, or maybe they're considering going to a YCS, but like, it's a travel commitment, you know? You're gonna book a flight, book a hotel, and like maybe you don't know if it's gonna be a good time. And I always thought it'd be cool to like, let's make a video and like show what's happening at these YCS events. And people have kind of done it. They've done vlogs and stuff, but like, you know, there's always the filming troubles and things like that. I think that that's something that I would like to see Konami like do the most with, is sort of like not just create strict raw like informational coverage, but also just sort of show like, this is how fun Yu-Gi-Oh can be when you get a bunch of people and do things like that. And to that end, I mean, they could show some YouTubers, right? Like, these are some of your favorite content creators. I don't know, I think it'd be an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, it's definitely ripe with potential for sure. I think definitely one play they could take out of like Magic's playbook, for instance, like their level of coverage when it comes to their like big tournaments that they live stream, whether it's the physical card game or now like with Magic Arena, like they do an incredible amount of coverage. Like they will do like their own professionally filmed deck profiles, like with the players, with like this gigantic screen in the background blowing up the cards so the players get like, it just makes it very visually appealing, but they're also getting the information like directly from the players. It makes it more personable. It creates this interpersonal dynamic, and again, it just focuses on the players and the experience of the event itself. With, like you said, with like our current events, the coverage is like good, but it's definitely lacking into what it potentially could be.
On I guess a different topic then, buy singles. Might be a familiar phrase.
I need to make that a shirt.
I'm saying that needs to be a shirt. Like I'm buying one. Buy singles of the shirt. I really do think that this is probably like the unofficial Cimo like sort of slogan, right?
Sure.
And some people think it's like, oh, it's a joke or whatever, but I do think it's a real concept. I, for one, agree. I mean, I think that like singles are the better way to go, but can you talk a little bit more about that yourself?
Yeah.
Like, what's the whole idea behind buy singles, and how do you feel like it became so synonymous with like you in particular?
Right, so a lot of this really came up with how I was raised. I mean, growing up, I wasn't really able to purchase packs of Yu-Gi-Oh cards because my parents were like, well, why would you buy packs of Yu-Gi-Oh cards when you could just go on eBay and buy the actual card that you want? And, you know, my 7-year-old brain at the time didn't really comprehend that, but when they showed that to me, it made a lot of sense. And so growing up, because obviously I didn't have like tons of disposable income as a 7-year-old, I got like an allowance every once in a while. I was then able to save up for like maybe a card or two that I wanted. I'd order it off eBay and I'd be pretty satisfied, rather than buying a booster pack and maybe being dissatisfied with what I got out of that pack. And so I want to also kind of keep that and make it a pillar of the channel, because for a lot of people, this game's expensive. Like, this game is really expensive. And so I would rather tell people how, essentially, you know, instill my beliefs into them, like saying, look, if you don't have a lot of money to play this game, you shouldn't be going out and buying the sealed product, when if you want to play the game for an affordable price, you have this other option. And on my own channel, I do buy sealed product every once in a while, but the reasons why I buy sealed product are different, because I'm not buying it because I'm looking for certain money cards. I'm buying it just to create an experience for the people on my channel who either can't afford to buy their own product to unbox, or maybe they live in a region that's so remote that Yu-Gi-Oh! Isn't even distributed, and I've gotten messages from people saying thank you because they don't have that experience, and so it's kind of like this mutual experience that we can all have together. Another interesting thing when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! Products specifically is that versus, let's say, Magic the Gathering. I know I've referenced this a lot, but I like to think about these games kind of all together and comparatively to one another. With Magic the Gathering and sealed product has a purpose because Magic is designed instinctively for draft, right? And so Yu-Gi-Oh! is not a game designed with draft in mind. I mean, you see that with the draft rules for Yu-Gi-Oh! That all monsters are all types and all attributes, which kind of, for me, kind of takes the fun out of it, but for some people, they enjoy it. The thing is, buying sealed product for Magic has that purpose where you can buy some packs, either build a sealed deck or just build a draft deck, a sealed deck, whatever, have that experience on like Friday night, and then, you know, that's really it. You're paying for that experience. Right. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not exactly designed in that way, and so because of that, that's another reason why I don't really particularly recommend that people buy the sealed product for that reason, because it's not designed to have that same experience. If they decided to pursue that in the future, then I'd probably change my view on it, but that's kind of my long-winded answer on where buy singles came from, essentially.
I made a video recently where I was sort of talking about like what I've heard as common complaints that people have. The price of the game is usually a really big one, but also just, you know, people feel like the game is too confusing or the power creep's really bad. How do you feel about those types of issues with the game? Like, I guess let's just start with the power creep thing and like deck imbalance. Do you feel like that's a big deal, or maybe like it's not so bad? Or
I feel power creep is inevitable for a card game because you have to look at it from a business model perspective. Like, you have a card pool, and so how do you get people to buy your newest set of cards if they're going to be good enough that you want to buy those cards over the cards you already have? So inherently, if you look at it that way, it kind of makes sense that power creep is going to naturally exist, because over time, they're going to have to print better cards. Otherwise, people aren't going to buy the cards, and that kind of just takes away from them wanting to make money. Now, there are ways to alleviate that, because I think in terms of like deck imbalance, we've actually struck a few points in the last several years actually where there was like a multitude of different decks that were very viable. Some were like very expensive, but some were actually really budget. I think Konami's been doing pretty decent with putting out some structure decks as of lately that, like, you buy 3 of the structure deck, it's not like gonna win you a regional or anything, but you at least have like this cohesive, comprehensive deck that's like playable. And then you just get a few extra staples, like I'm thinking Salamangreat off the top of my head. You know, you just get some Signet Minings and, you know, a couple other cards, and you pretty much have like a tier 1 deck. And that was for the good course of a year. You know, versus having to, you know, dive into booster boxes, get all of the archetype staples that are like ultra and secret rare. I'm thinking harder, I'm thinking like Thunder Dragon when it comes to that. So it's 2 different ways to go about it, but I think relatively, power creep's inevitable, but I think there's ways that in the newer sets that they create, there's still ways that when they design these sets, they could give 1 or 2 cards to like older archetypes to either keep them like semi-relevant or to at least kind of boost them up a little bit, and that the ban list can also help with that as well. So that way you don't feel like there's this massive power discrepancy between what are perceived to be the best decks and the worst decks.
And also, what about just kind of how confusing Yu-Gi-Oh! Can seem to an outsider? Which, to me, like personally, I know a lot of people think that like the price is bad or like the power creep's bad, but this is my personal sort of concern of the 3 things, I'd say. Like, this is the one that I feel is like perhaps the most threatening to like Yu-Gi-Oh!'s sort of barrier to entry, like longevity, all of that.
Right.
Do you feel like Yu-Gi-Oh's like not like too complicated to learn, but do you think that the complication is an issue?
Yeah, I've talked about this in depth on my channel a few times. I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh probably has the steepest learning curve of any card game in existence because when you're first starting out, there is just so much information you have to absorb, and I don't think the human brain is like physically capable of being able to do that.
Yeah, no, you reminded me, actually, I feel like with Yu-Gi-Oh, that's 100% right, because it's like, with Yu-Gi-Oh, you almost just have to like learn trial by fire, almost. Like, whenever I see someone like starting to play Yu-Gi-Oh, they never learn like 100% of the rules, or even like 80% of them early on. Like, they just kind of like learn some stuff, and then they just start playing, and just they kind of run into problems and have to learn what missing the timing is by losing to it, or like what chain blocking is by losing to it, or damage step. Okay, well, you can't use this in the damage step, but it's like, it's almost, you just have to like learn it by feel, which it really isn't. It really shouldn't be that, you know. But like,
I think it's two-pronged. I think one part of it is the card design itself doesn't exactly lend itself to making it new player friendly. So for instance, when you're a brand new player, you don't know that you can only normal summon monsters at a level 4 or lower. Like, it doesn't make that obvious on the card. Whereas, for instance, like, take Magic the Gathering. I keep referencing Magic, but like, Magic has the mana symbols at the top right of the card. So, okay, I need 2 red to play this card. I have 2 red on the field. I can play this card. Like, it just kind of makes more sense, just like psychologically, to be able to create these connections. Whereas Yu-Gi-Oh has a lot of unwritten rules that, like, well, they're written, like, they're codified in the rule book, but I mean, like, unwritten in the sense of, it doesn't say it on the card specifically, but then also unwritten when it comes to, like you were referencing, with like missing the timing and all these different things. Yes, these rules exist, but unless you really have a very good understanding of the game and understanding like the semantics of wording on the cards, it can be very brutal trying to learn this game from the ground up. And even for a lot of returning players, it's still difficult for them to get them caught up with how much they've missed, depending on what point they dropped out of the game.
Do you feel like it's just sort of like, if you get it, you get it, if you don't, you don't? Because that's sort of what I've started to think. Like, whenever I say anything about this online, there's always people who are like, well, it's so obvious, this is an inherent summon, of course you can't negate this, or like, that's supposed to be 4, or it's like, but I think it's like, if you get Yu-Gi-Oh, you get it, and you're in that in-group, and for people like that, like, learning pendulums isn't hard. Like, it's just kind of one more layer on top, or learning links isn't hard, because it's like, well, it's not so different, you just add, you know, some nuances. But I think that if you're new, it's just too much to stack up. Like,
yeah, I think it really boils down to how committed you truly are. I think if you have a background in other card games, like let's say you played like Magic or Hearthstone or Pokemon in the past, then I don't think transitioning to Yu-Gi-Oh is nearly as rough. But if you're just coming from the ground up, I think you really have to either have like a strong emotional connection to the game, you really just have like a good friend who's trying to really teach you, or you really just have to be committed in general and disciplined enough to understand, like, there is a lot to learn with this game, and it is like I agree with the trial by fire thing. I think that's actually one of the best ways to teach people, because like, you're going to run into roadblocks. People now run into roadblocks with this game. Even when a new set is released, just understanding some of the way cards interact with one another, people still struggle even though they have like multiple tops under their belt. So even the better players will struggle.
Also, a small thing that I've always disliked is that there's not actually an official sort of judge resource in this game. I feel like that's just a big failing. Like, I get that we have like Facebook groups and stuff like that, but it's always been weird to me that there isn't more of an official repository to just find some card-specific rulings. That's just so strange.
I think the biggest way to alleviate this, and I have been vouching for this for years, is that we need an official online simulator. If this was a first-party software created by Konami that effectively was like Duel Links for the actual TCG, the reason why this would be so incredible is because not only would it effectively be a judge resource, because if the way the cards are coded in that software is how the cards should actually interact with one another, it's actually teaching people appropriately how the cards will work. But also, and I think more importantly, and I think given the circumstances of coronavirus, this underscores this entirely, being able to play Yu-Gi-Oh! At any time, any day, like, I think that is completely invaluable for this game, and I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh's treading a little bit behind in that regard, because a lot of the other top games, card games, have a online equivalent, and it doesn't necessarily take away from the people who play the physical TCG. I think people would play both, because then you can have the online for situations like this, or if you just don't want to travel to events, or you have the players who want to play the physical TCG and go out and do their thing. I think it would just be so great. So many people have been calling out for it for such a long time.
It would solve so many problems.
It would.
So
it would. I
issues.
think it would. It would just be the one-all catch-all for just taking care of, 10 different problems at once.
Okay, so last question from me before we get into a couple of quick fan things. So the Yu-Gi-Oh community, it's a great community. Obviously, we're a big part of it. What is your favorite part about the Yu-Gi-Oh community? And then also I want to know what some of your maybe pet peeves are. But let's start with the positive. What's your favorite part about the Yu-Gi-Oh community for you personally?
Yeah, I think my favorite, there's a lot. I've played this game essentially since it came out, so there's a lot of favorites I have. But I think if I had to just generalize and just pick one, I would say that the community is actually very friendly. Obviously, all communities are going to have their bad apples, and those are going to stick out more often than, they always say, 10 positive experiences get outweighed by 1 negative. But I've been around this game a very long time, and there is a lot of people that just genuinely enjoy playing this game and just really want to find other people who enjoy playing it as well, whether they are hardcore competitive or, they just want to play casually. I've seen just at tournaments all the time that players, whether they just had the duel of their lives, even after the fact, they still shake hands, they're laughing the whole time, and they'll even ask one another oh, should I have done this differently? They're seeking advice, and people are so forthcoming with wanting to help one another, because at the end of the day, this game is relatively small in terms of how many people actually do play compared to a lot of other games. And so I think a lot of people understand that and just want to be friendly and help other people either get better at it or just, enjoy that experience even more.
I feel like you in particular have such a positive outlook and you keep it really professional. Is there what's the dark side of Cimo look like in terms of his opinions on Yu-Gi-Oh or Yu-Gi-Oh events or Yu-Gi-Oh players? So do you feel like what are those things for you?
Sure. So the first one I'm going to say, and this is kind of a meme, but it's kind of true at the same time. Take a shower before you go to a tournament or something. I don't know, why is hygiene an issue in 2020? If you're going to pay $1,000 to play a meta deck at a tournament, if you're going to pay to travel to that tournament, you can go to the dollar store and buy some deodorant at the very least and make everyone's experience a little bit more pleasant. Again, this doesn't happen every time at every event, but it happens enough that I just kind of want to joke about this.
Yeah, no, I think you're right though. People,
yeah,
it's a meme, but it's also not a meme. They had to make a rule about.
I think especially for you and I as well, because we're public figures, we meet a lot more people than I think the average player might encounter. And so as a result of that, I think it might be more salient to us as a result of that. So again, it's not that big of a deal, but just take a shower, please, for everyone's sake. I think if there was one thing I really had to pinpoint, I thought long and hard about this. It's the theft thing. I think people stealing from one another, this is one of the most childish, just juvenile things that we still have to deal with. You've experienced this. You got your deck stolen at the last. What I will say I'm in the same boat as you, but fortunately, whoever I don't want to say they stole my deck, but what happened was I left my deck at a table during a round. I didn't even realize it, but what happened was that person was kind enough to give it to the Lost and Found, and I was able to recover it. So I want to start by saying there are a lot of good people out there that if they see someone left a deck behind, they will return it. So don't just completely think that everyone is just out to take your stuff. There are some good people out there, but the fact that at the beginning of each tournament, we literally have to have a discussion about theft and watching your items to make sure other people don't steal them. it's unfortunate because people bring like several $1,000s worth of cards in a backpack at some point, and it's just sometimes because they just love trading with other people, or they just love, like, you know, finding new cards to trade for, or maybe their deck is just worth that much, and that's fine. But it's just unfortunate because there's so many other people that either working alone or working in teams, it gets that systematic at times that they are pinpointing specific players that they know might be a little bit clumsy and just try to swipe their stuff when they're not paying attention. And I've seen it time and time again. Like I said, I've been around this game for so long. I really wish that, like, we didn't have to deal with this.
Okay, so the last thing is I got some questions from Twitter, just really quick questions, you know, answer them as fast as you can, in as much detail or as little detail as you want.
Sure.
In-N-Out or Whataburger? This is from
In-N-Out.
MBT Yu-Gi-Oh!
Okay, is this MBT? Yeah, I knew it. Okay, yeah. We've been having this argument for, it's In-N-Out. There's no debate. In-N-Out's better. West Coast, best coast. Next question.
So why only 8 O's and not 9?
Oh, okay, so this is the greatest story ever, actually. So when I was first making my YouTube channel, I wanted to make sure that if this channel ever did become something, you know, I guess that was good thinking, that I wanted to have my handle be the same across all social media platforms so people didn't have to type different things. So I wanted it to be the same on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitch. And so my last name just has 1 O, sadly, but I tried to just put with like several different amounts of O's. So I tried 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and for some reason, on the platforms that I was trying to do this on, people had already taken the handle of just Cimo with multiple numbers of O's, and 8 was the lowest number of O's that I could use that was the same across all platforms. But it kind of works out because people kind of shout my name like across like the venue at events. They'll be like, Cimo! And so it's kind of like verbal onomatopoeia with all the O's, which I think is kind of cool.
What is your favorite Yu-Gi-Oh memory?
Wow, that's a big question. I think if I had to pick one in the 5 seconds you've given me to think about this, it would have to probably be when I flew up to Toronto to help my friend Philip with cerebral palsy compete in his first ever YCS by acting as his arms so that he could play in a tournament.
I remember reading about that. That was incredible what you did.
Yeah, it was really cool. We met for I think he was a patron of mine, as a matter of fact. That's how we first met, and we would talk all the time. And one day I'm just like, you know what, I want to do this for you. And so flew up to Toronto for YCS Toronto. We asked the head judge. I actually have a whole video about it if you want to see that for anyone watching. But yeah, it was a really humbling experience. It was so cool because he was perfectly able to play the game, and he was just like he was like shit talking people. He was just like, he was having a blast. It was like the time of his life. He said at the end of it that event like made his whole summer, and that really did bring tears to my eyes when I did that, because it was so humbling, and I don't know. There's really not much else I can say about it.
All right, well, thanks again. Be sure to subscribe, guys, to me and to Cimo, and hopefully we can do this again sometime. All right, see you guys in the next one. Pass turn.